Centuries of secrets lie hidden just inches beneath ancient abbey floors. These forgotten manuscripts and artifacts whisper tales of interconnected medieval minds, a reality waiting to reveal its truths. We will explore this clandestine world to discover how medieval knowledge networks foreshadowed our own digital age. How did scattered monasteries share ideas across continents without any modern technology? We will uncover the hidden systems for exchanging knowledge and decode the mysterious texts they safeguarded. By the end, you will see the Middle Ages not as a dark time, but as a period of brilliant intellectual exchange. What hidden part of history most makes you question what you thought you knew? The first light of dawn would creep across the quiet cloisters, illuminating a scene of silent, purposeful activity. In a medieval monastery, the day began long before most of the world was awake. This was not a place of solitary isolation, but a humming intellectual engine. The abbey was a meticulously designed machine for thinking. Its very architecture was a blueprint for knowledge. Monks moved in a steady rhythm from the scriptorium, where they spent hours bent over parchment, to the library where precious codices were chained to desks, and then to the chapel for prayer. This cycle of reading, writing, and reflection was the heartbeat of their existence. Historian Dr. Elena Vance describes these abbeys as the server farms of their day, places where data was not only stored but actively processed and upgraded. Consider the layout. The cloister garden, a square of green at the heart of the complex, was not just for meditation. It was a conversational hub, a place where monks could walk and talk, debating a fine point of philosophy or sharing a new idea gleaned from a recently arrived manuscript. Nearby, the chapter house hosted daily meetings where the community's business was discussed, from managing lands to interpreting difficult texts. This was collaborative learning in action, centuries before the modern university. Different monastic orders had different specialties. The Benedictines were famed for their scriptoria and vast library collections, while the Cistercians often pushed agricultural innovation. Information flowed in and out through a sophisticated messenger system, with travelers and pilgrims carrying letters and books between these scattered hubs. The Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland stands as a perfect example. Its famous architectural plan, drawn in the early 9th century, shows a complete community with a school, a hospital, and a guest house, proving it was designed as a center for both learning and hospitality, a safe haven for any traveling scholar. It makes you wonder, how do the physical spaces we work in today, our offices and libraries and coffee shops, shape the ideas we create? All of this vibrant intellectual life, every copied manuscript and every heated debate, was happening just above the very floorboards that would one day hide these secrets from the world. These stone floors were far more than simple foundations. Under the worn surfaces trod by generations of monks lay a secret world of compartments and cavities, intentionally designed to protect a monastery's most precious possessions. The architecture of security was built right into the ground beneath their feet. Builders employed ingenious techniques to create these hidden spaces. A floorboard might appear solid and fixed, but one specific plank could be carefully cut to lift away, revealing a hollow chamber beneath. Heavy stone slabs, seemingly immovable, sometimes pivoted on concealed iron hinges, opening into small, dark crypts. At Fountains Abbey in England, for instance, archaeologists found precisely such cavities, used to safeguard important charters and sacred relics from theft or destruction during times of turmoil. Architectural historians emphasize that these features were deliberate, a calculated part of the building's design. They were not afterthoughts but built-in safes. The types of hiding spots varied. Some were simple underfloor voids, accessible only by prying up tiles. Others were more elaborate, like secret niches constructed within the thick walls near altars, their entrances seamlessly blended into the stonework. The materials chosen were crucial for both durability and discretion. Tough, resilient oak was often used for wooden panels, as it would not warp or creak excessively over time, betraying the secret. There was a powerful symbolism to these hidden areas as well. They represented a clear division between the knowledge shared with the congregation and the deeper, more esoteric wisdom reserved and protected by the monastic community itself. A compelling case comes from Kloster Maulbronn in Germany, where a restoration project uncovered a sealed vault beneath the choir floor. Inside, workers found not gold or jewels, but a trove of rare musical manuscripts, preserving compositions that might otherwise have been lost forever. It makes you pause to consider, what single item would you choose to hide away to ensure its survival for a future generation you will never meet? The very existence of these spaces confirms that the most valuable treasures were those of the mind, carefully concealed from a dangerous world. These hidden spaces were not hollow voids. They were time capsules packed with the written soul of the abbey. When a floorboard was finally lifted after centuries, the true treasure was often a cascade of parchment and vellum. These were not just books, but the very lifeblood of the knowledge network, from breathtakingly beautiful illuminated gospels to practical, dirt-smudged herbals detailing the medicinal properties of local plants. The motivation for hiding them was stark and simple. Fear was a powerful architect. The threat of Viking raids, local conflicts, or even religious reformations meant that a monastery's intellectual wealth had to be protected from fire and plunder. Concealing these records was an act of desperation, a last-ditch effort to preserve a culture's memory. Creating just one of these manuscripts was a monumental task. Paleographers like Professor Michael Torres described the painstaking process. A single sheet of parchment required the skin of an entire sheep or calf, scraped, soaked, and stretched. Inks were handmade from soot, oak galls, and precious minerals. A scribe might spend a year completing a single Bible, his hand cramping around a quill, letter by precise letter. The documents hidden away fell into several crucial categories. First were the religious works, the core of monastic life. These included psalters for daily prayer and theological commentaries debating the nature of faith. Then came the scientific and medical treatises, translating ancient Greek and Arab knowledge into Latin. A hidden cache at St. Augustine's Abbey in Canterbury, for instance, contained medical texts that would later influence surgical practices in England for generations. Finally, there were the administrative records, the dry but vital charters, deeds, and account books that documented land ownership, rents, and the day-to-day business of running a vast estate. The languages used tell a story of layered identity. Formal works were in Latin, the international language of the church and scholarship, but notes in the margins, personal letters, and practical guides might be written in Old English, Old Irish, or early forms of German, the living languages of the people. These marginalia are especially precious. A monk might doodle in the corner of a page, or write a frustrated note about the cold, or add a correction to a recipe. These small marks are the fingerprints of the past, showing us real people interacting with these texts. Think about your own digital footprints, the comments you leave on articles, the notes you jot in the margins of an ebook. Are we not also annotating our own era for future generations to discover? These individual documents, however, were far from isolated. Each one was a single node in a vast and sprawling web of intellectual exchange. A young boy arriving at an abbey for the first time was stepping into one of the most advanced learning environments of his age. Far from being silent retreats cut off from the world, monasteries functioned as dynamic schools, nurturing the brightest minds across Europe. This educational mission was central to their identity. Under the patient guidance of a master, a novice would begin a rigorous curriculum designed to train not just the hand for copying, but the mind for critical thought. The foundation of all learning was the 7 liberal arts, divided into the trivium and the quadrivium. The trivium, comprising grammar, rhetoric, and logic, gave students the tools of language and reason. They learned to read complex Latin texts, to construct a persuasive argument, and to spot a logical fallacy. Once this foundation was solid, they advanced to the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, which explored the mathematical order of the universe itself. This was a complete system for cultivating an educated person. Educational historian Dr. Liam Chen describes this framework as the medieval world's operating system, a standardized curriculum that allowed a scholar from Northumbria to converse meaningfully with one from Italy. Teaching methods were intensely interactive and demanded deep engagement. Students practiced relentless memorization, a necessary skill in a world where books were rare. But they also engaged in disputation, formal debates where they would defend a position against their peers, sharpening their wits and their understanding of complex theological or philosophical questions. The library was the engine room of this entire process. It provided the essential fuel, the codices and manuscripts that contained all known science, history, and literature. At the monastic school of Reichenau Abbey on an island in Lake Constance, this system produced scholars like Walafrid Strabo, whose writings on theology and poetry were celebrated across the continent. The education often extended beyond those taking holy orders. Sons of nobles and even promising local boys could be sent to the abbey for schooling, creating a surprisingly literate lay elite. To support this, monks painstakingly produced their own textbooks, copying and annotating key works by authors like Boethius and Isidore of Seville. This intellectual revival was powerfully shaped by figures like Alcuin of York, who was invited by Charlemagne to oversee his palace school and reform education throughout his empire. Alcuin's letters reveal a network of former students, now abbots and bishops, all applying the methods they had learned. It prompts a fascinating comparison. When you log into an online course today, engaging with a standardized curriculum and a global community of learners through digital texts, are you not participating in a modern trivium and quadrivium, a new kind of knowledge network that echoes the old? This robust educational backbone was what produced the very scholars who would build and maintain the intricate webs of intellectual exchange. A single letter could travel 1,000 miles, its contents rippling through the intellectual life of a dozen abbeys. This was the medieval internet in action, a resilient web of human connections that defied the continent's fragmented geography. Knowledge did not stay put. It moved along established pilgrimage routes like the Camino de Santiago, where travelers were more than just pilgrims. They were data packets carrying news, books, and ideas in their packs. Traders and royal messengers also served as crucial couriers, their well-traveled routes becoming the backbone of this information superhighway. The mechanisms of exchange were both formal and deeply personal. A constant stream of letters flowed between abbots and scholars, debating fine points of theology or describing a new astronomical observation. These were not private notes, they were often read aloud in the scriptorium or chapter house, their ideas sparking local discussion and further correspondence. Equally important was the tradition of gift exchange. An abbot might send a beautifully copied psalter to a sister house as a gesture of goodwill, and in return receive a rare herbal from the East. This was a gift economy of knowledge where the currency was intellectual prestige. The scriptorium was the node where this network manifested physically. When a rare text arrived from afar, it became the exemplar, the master copy from which local scribes would produce new versions. This process of copying and dissemination created a form of standardization, ensuring that a work by Bede in Northumbria could be reliably reproduced in a monastery in Bavaria. Major events like church councils acted as massive data sinks for this network, bringing leading minds together to debate and decide on doctrines that would then be disseminated across the web. The Venerable Bede himself, working from his remote monastery at Jarrow, was a central node. His extensive correspondence with continental scholars spread his historical and scientific ideas, making his work a foundational text for centuries. Network theorists who study these patterns see a system of stunning efficiency. It was a decentralized, redundant network. If one pathway was cut off by war or famine, others remained open. The knowledge shared was incredibly diverse, ranging from intense theological debates about the nature of the soul to practical scientific discoveries in agriculture and medicine, and even the latest artistic techniques for illuminating a capital letter. Can you see the parallel when you share an article with your online community, or when a viral idea jumps from one social media platform to another? You are participating in the exact same kind of organic, human-driven network. But this vast, impersonal system relied entirely on the dedication of specific, flesh and blood individuals. The true power of that sprawling network resided in the hands of the individual scribe. In the flickering light of a tallow candle, a single monk could bridge continents and centuries with the steady scratch of his quill. These men and women were the original knowledge brokers, dedicating their entire lives to the silent, sacred work of preservation. Their role was profoundly active, not passive. A scribe was never a mere photocopier. He was an editor, a translator, and sometimes even a co-author, adding his own glosses in the margins to explain a difficult passage, correcting errors from a faulty exemplar, or silently improving the flow of a sentence. Consider Eadfrith, the Bishop of Lindisfarne in the early 8th century. Historians believe he was the sole artist and scribe behind the breathtaking Lindisfarne Gospels. For years, he labored over this single book, blending Celtic knotwork, Germanic animal interlace, and Mediterranean figurative art to create a masterpiece of cultural fusion. His work was not just devotional, it was a political and intellectual statement, asserting the sophistication of a northern English kingdom. Then there is the towering figure of Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess whose mind seemed to know no bounds. Her prolific output included not only visionary theological works, but also detailed studies of natural science, medicine, and musical composition. She corresponded with popes and emperors, acting as a crucial bridge between her secluded Rhineland convent and the highest echelons of European power. A biographer of Hildegard, Dr. Anya Sharma, notes that her multidisciplinary approach was the norm for the greatest monastic minds. They did not see a divide between science and spirit, for the study of nature was the study of God's creation. The daily reality in the scriptorium was one of intense discipline and hierarchy. The master scribe or armarius would assign the most important texts to the most skilled brothers. Novices might begin by preparing the parchment, ruling faint lines to guide writing, or practicing their letters on wax tablets. The work was physically grueling. A scribe's back and neck ached from hours of hunching over a writing desk. His fingers grew cramped from holding the quill. The materials themselves were a constant challenge. Parchment was expensive and scarce, leading to the practice of palimpsests, where old text was scraped away to make room for the new. Ink could freeze in the winter, and the quality of imported pigments was always uncertain. Beyond these physical trials, scribes worked under immense political and social pressure. Copying a heretical text, even by accident, could have severe consequences. Yet within this rigid structure, we find touching glimpses of personal rebellion and local identity. In one famous example, a scribe in a northern French monastery was copying a standard religious text. When he reached a blank space at the end of a chapter, he did not leave it empty. Instead, he secretly inserted a handful of local recipes, including one for a digestive remedy using herbs from the abbey garden. This was knowledge he deemed vital for his own community, smuggled into the sacred text. Other scribes used simple forms of cryptography to encode personal notes or protect sensitive information, a testament to the layers of meaning embedded in their work. So who are our modern knowledge brokers? They are the open-source software developers building the digital commons, the librarians digitizing decaying newspapers, the fact-checkers battling online misinformation. They are anyone who takes raw information, verifies it, contextualizes it, and makes it accessible to others. The tools may have changed from quill and parchment to keyboard and screen, but the essential, human-driven work of weaving the web of knowledge remains strikingly familiar. And just as the scribe's output was shaped by the quality of his quill and the texture of his vellum, the next revolution in this story came from the very substances they used to make their mark. The scratch of a quill was only the final sound in a long symphony of preparation. Every manuscript began with the transformation of raw animal skin into a pristine writing surface. The creation of parchment was a smelly, laborious craft. A skin would be soaked in lime for days to loosen hair, then stretched taut on a frame and scraped thin with a moon-shaped knife. The goal was a smooth, uniform sheet, but the process was imperfect. You can still see the ghostly outline of a calf's spine or the follicle patterns of a sheep on the pages of a 1,000-year-old book, a permanent reminder of the living creature that gave its skin for knowledge. Next came the ink, and this was where monastic chemistry truly shone. The most common and durable ink was iron gall, a recipe perfected in places like Corby Abbey. It was made from oak galls, the strange growths formed by wasps on tree bark, mixed with iron sulfate and gum arabic. When first applied, it looked a pale, watery gray, but as it oxidized on the parchment, it deepened into a permanent, rich black, biting into the surface to ensure the text would last for centuries. Conservators in modern museums marvel at its resilience, noting that while the parchment around it may darken and brittle, the iron gall writing often remains starkly legible, a testament to a brilliantly effective medieval technology. The tools of the scribe were extensions of his own body. His writing desk was angled to support the precious page. He held a sharp quill cut from the feather of a goose or swan, and a knife, not for defense but for constant correction. This knife was his eraser and his ruler, used to scrape away mistakes and to score straight guidelines. When the writing and illuminating were finally complete, the bookbinder took over. Individual pages or folios were folded into gatherings, sewn together with strong linen thread onto leather cords. These cords were then laced into wooden boards, often oak, which were covered in damp leather. As the leather dried, it shrank, creating an incredibly tight, protective binding that could survive drops, rough handling, and the relentless passage of time. The shift from the scroll to this codex form, our modern book, was a revolutionary leap in data access. A scroll required 2 hands to unroll, making it difficult to consult quickly. A codex could be opened to any page, indexed, and compared with other texts side by side. It was the medieval equivalent of moving from a single, endless computer tape to a system of searchable, hyperlinked files. All of this innovation came at a staggering cost. The materials for a single Bible could require the skins of 200 sheep, representing a massive investment for the abbey. The most vivid blues in illuminations came from ground lapis lazuli, a semi-precious stone imported at great expense from Afghanistan. This was not a cheap or casual endeavor. It was a monumental allocation of community resources dedicated to a single purpose: preservation. So when we save a file to the cloud, a process that feels weightless and free, are we creating something with the same inherent physical durability as that iron gall ink on parchment? The very existence of these painstakingly crafted objects, each one a small fortress of knowledge, makes their subsequent concealment all the more understandable. Why go to such extraordinary lengths only to risk it all to the whims of a destructive world? Viking longships appeared on the horizon without warning, their dragon prows slicing through the morning mist toward the undefended shore. The first sign of trouble for a monastery like Lindisfarne was often the smoke and the screams. This was not an isolated event, but a constant, looming terror that shaped the very architecture of security. The decision to hide a library was born from a desperate calculus of survival. Historians point to the sack of Lindisfarne in 793 as a psychological turning point for monastic Europe, an attack on a spiritual center that sent a shockwave of fear through the entire network. The threat was not just from foreign raiders seeking portable wealth. Political upheavals like the Norman invasion of England in 1066 could see abbeys caught between warring factions, their lands trampled and buildings commandeered. But perhaps the most systematic threat came from within during periods of religious reformation. The dissolution of the monasteries under King Henry VIII was a bureaucratic extinction event. Royal commissioners arrived with orders to strip the abbeys of their wealth, disband their communities, and destroy their so-called superstitious manuscripts. In the face of such existential dangers, concealment became the only viable strategy. The types of threats were as varied as they were devastating. Military attacks brought fire and the sword, reducing parchment and ink to ash in moments. Accidental fires were a perpetual hazard in buildings lit by candle and heated by open flame. And then there was the quiet, insidious threat of censorship by religious or royal authorities, where certain ideas were deemed too dangerous to exist and were actively sought out for destruction. At Revolks Abbey in Yorkshire, as dissolution loomed, the monks made a fateful choice. They gathered a core collection of their most precious charters and theological works, sealed them in a lead-lined chest, and lowered it into a deep, purpose-dug pit beneath the chapter house floor. They covered it with rubble and fled, their secret safe from the king's men who would soon pick the place clean. The psychological toll on these communities was immense. Imagine the weight of that decision, knowing you might be the last person to see a sacred text for centuries, if ever again. It was an act of profound faith in the future, a bet that knowledge would one day be more valued than gold. What single idea, what crucial piece of understanding would you risk everything to protect from the wrecking ball of history? This ever-present fear of loss forged a unique kind of innovation, transforming quiet cloisters into fortresses of memory. That lead-lined chest lowered into the ground at Revolks was more than a hiding place. It was a sacred tomb for living knowledge. The act of concealment itself was steeped in profound spiritual meaning for the monks who performed it. For them, a stone floor was not just a physical barrier. It was a potent symbol of the boundary between the mundane, earthly world and the divine, eternal realm above and below. To place a treasured object beneath it was to return it to a state of holy potential, awaiting a future resurrection. Theologians like Dr. Samuel Petrovic described this as sacred secrecy, a practice where the very act of hiding an object amplified its spiritual power, setting it apart for God alone. The process was often accompanied by solemn rituals, Before sealing a cavity, a priest might bless the space, dedicating it to a saint and praying for the protection of its contents not just from thieves, but from the corruption of time itself. This imbued the hidden relic or text with a layer of spiritual protection, making it a silent, intercessory prayer embedded in the very bones of the abbey. The emotional connection these men felt to the objects they concealed was intensely personal. A scribe might be hiding a psalter he had spent a year illuminating, every decorated initial a memory of painstaking labor and devotion. An abbot could be sealing away the founding charter of his house, a document that represented the collective identity and divine mission of his entire community. They were not burying property, they were entombing a part of their own souls. This deep personal investment explains the legends that grew around certain hidden items. At Glastonbury Abbey, it was widely believed that a set of concealed chronicles contained not just history, but powerful prophecies about the future of Britain. The mystery of what was hidden became as important as the objects themselves, feeding the faith of a community that believed their most profound truths were too powerful to be left in the open. We see echoes of this in our own lives, do we not? Think of the time capsule buried in a schoolyard filled with children's letters to the future. It holds little monetary value, but its emotional weight is immense because it represents hope, a message sent blindly forward in time. The medieval monk sealing a text under the floor was doing the very same thing, acting on a faith that someday someone would find it and understand its worth. This spiritual drive to preserve, to hide away meaning for an unknown future, created a cultural impact that would ripple far beyond the monastery walls. The same herbs grown in a monastery's garden often ended up in the hands of a village healer miles away, their uses detailed in a book she could not read but whose wisdom she trusted completely. The knowledge cultivated beneath those abbey roofs did not stay there. It flowed outward like water, seeping into the very foundations of medieval society and reshaping art, law, medicine, and daily life in its wake. A king ruling from Paris might rely on advisors educated in monastic schools, their minds shaped by a standardized curriculum that spanned the continent. A local court administering justice would slowly adopt principles preserved and debated in abbey libraries, principles that would eventually coalesce into the foundations of common law. This was the quiet, pervasive cultural impact of the monastic network. Historians of the Carolingian Renaissance, like Dr. Isabella Rossi, point to this period as a perfect example. The push for educational and legal reform under Charlemagne was executed through the very abbey networks we have been exploring, creating a remarkable moment of cultural unification across a fractured empire. The standardization of liturgical practice was one of the most profound effects. Before this network was fully established, a mass in one town could look and sound completely different from a mass in the next. Through the diligent work of scribes copying and disseminating approved texts, a common Roman rite began to spread, creating a shared religious experience that helped forge a collective European identity. This was cultural programming on a massive scale, all transmitted through parchment and ink. The preservation of classical texts provided the intellectual fuel for future revolutions. When a monk in a remote Swiss abbey copied a crumbling manuscript of a Roman poet like Virgil or a Greek philosopher like Aristotle, he was not just saving words. He was saving a world of thought, ensuring that the Renaissance, still centuries away, would have something to rediscover. These texts formed the essential bridge between antiquity and the modern world. Beyond the elite realms of kings and scholars, the impact was deeply practical. Improved agricultural techniques, trialed and recorded on monastic estates, were shared through letters and travel, leading to better crop yields that fed growing populations. The Benedictine rule itself, with its emphasis on order, stability, and communal labor, became a model for secular community organization, influencing how towns and guilds structured their own affairs. This created unexpected avenues for social mobility. A bright boy from a peasant family, educated in the abbey school, could rise to become a clerk, a scribe, or even a trusted administrator, his life transformed by access to knowledge. An entire economy flourished around this exchange, with specialized workshops emerging to supply the abbeys with parchment, ink, and pigments, and a vibrant trade in books connecting distant centers of learning. So when you use a common software platform that works the same way in Tokyo as it does in Toronto, or when you follow a globally recognized standard for anything from electrical plugs to food safety, you are experiencing a modern version of that same drive for cultural and practical unification. These medieval networks were anything but static, and their greatest test was yet to come, a test that would force their hidden knowledge into the light. The monastic network was not a static relic. It was a living system that evolved for over 700 years. Its story is one of constant adaptation, growing from isolated nodes of light into a brilliant, continent-spanning web. The first flickers appeared in the remote, wind-swept monasteries of Ireland, places like Skellig Michael, where monks copied texts in near-total isolation, preserving classical learning while the rest of Europe fractured. But this isolation could not last. The Carolingian Renaissance of the 8th and 9th centuries actively engineered a more connected system, with royal power fueling the standardization of script and curriculum. Then came the Cluniac reforms of the 10th century, which wove a new kind of organizational fabric. Cluny Abbey in France became the heart of a vast network of over 1,000 dependent priories, all answering to the mother house. This created a centralized hierarchical structure for the first time, allowing for an unprecedented flow of people, ideas, and books across Europe. This was the network scaling up, moving from a collection of independent servers to something resembling an integrated system. By the 12th century, a true renaissance was underway, fueled by the very success of these earlier networks. The rise of cathedral schools like the one at Chartres shifted the center of gravity from the secluded cloister to the bustling town. At Chartres, scholars like Thierry and Bernard delved into the works of Plato and Aristotle, blending faith with a new, vibrant rationalism. Their commentaries and teaching methods would directly feed into the curricula of the first universities emerging in Bologna, Paris, and Oxford. This was a fundamental shift from monastic learning, which was focused on spiritual formation, to a scholastic model dedicated to professional training and open intellectual disputation. External shocks repeatedly reshaped the flow of knowledge. The Crusades, for all their violence, opened new conduits to Arab and Greek learning, reintroducing works of medicine, astronomy, and philosophy that had been lost to the Latin West. The devastating Black Death of the 14th century, while it decimated populations, also disrupted old hierarchies and created labor shortages that, in some regions, empowered a new literate laity. The very participants in the network began to diversify dramatically. The rise of the mendicant orders, the Franciscans and Dominicans in the 13th century, injected a new dynamism. These were not monks tied to one place, but friars who lived in urban centers, preaching and teaching among the people. They became a new class of intellectual couriers, establishing their own schools and rivaling the secular masters at the great universities. The network was no longer the exclusive domain of cloistered monks. Lay scholars, notaries, and even skilled artisans began to participate in the exchange of technical and artistic knowledge. Technological innovation played a crucial, often overlooked role. The slow introduction of paper from the Islamic world, cheaper and more accessible than parchment, began to democratize the book. The evolution of Gothic architecture, with its vast windows and soaring spaces, created cathedrals that were not just churches, but three-dimensional encyclopedias of stone and stained glass, broadcasting theological and natural knowledge to an entire city. The network around Chartres Abbey did not just preserve old ideas, it generated new ones that would shape early university thinking for centuries. This constant evolution, driven by reform, crisis, and new technology, mirrors our own digital age. When a new social media platform emerges or a breakthrough in data compression changes how we share information, we are watching the same kind of network adaptation in real time. And just as these medieval networks were built on layers of rediscovered classical knowledge, our ability to understand them today depends entirely on a different kind of rediscovery, one conducted not with quills but with trowels and radar. A silent wave of radar pulses sweeps across a cathedral's stone floor, mapping secrets without ever lifting a hammer. This is the new frontier of archaeology, where technology allows us to see through time itself. Ground-penetrating radar sends electromagnetic waves into the ground, and the signals that bounce back paint a detailed picture of hidden voids, walls, and even metal containers. At Whitby Abbey, resistivity surveys did exactly this, revealing anomalies in the soil's electrical current that pinpointed the location of a long-lost scriptorium, its foundation stones lying just beneath the turf. Another revolutionary tool is LiDAR, which uses laser pulses from an aircraft to strip away dense forest canopy and modern construction, revealing the ghostly outlines of entire monastic landscapes that are invisible from the ground. These non-invasive methods are guided by a core ethical principle: to first do no harm to these fragile sites. Archaeologists now act more like surgeons than treasure hunters, diagnosing a site before any physical intervention. The process is meticulous. A full geophysical survey comes first, creating a map of potential targets. Only then might a small, keyhole excavation be approved, where every grain of soil is sieved and every artifact's position is recorded with millimeter precision. Dendrochronology, the science of tree ring dating, can then take a single piece of oak from a hidden chest and tell you not just the year the tree was cut down, but often even the season. In the laboratory, the secrets deepen. X-ray fluorescence can analyze the chemical composition of medieval inks without touching the page, tracing a specific batch of iron gall ink to a particular region, perhaps even a specific abbey's workshop. This tells us not just what was written, but where the materials to write it came from, mapping the economic veins of the knowledge network. All of this discovered information finds a new home in digital archives. Every fragment, from a sliver of wood to a full manuscript, is photographed in high resolution, its data preserved forever in the digital cloud, a modern equivalent to the monastic library. Dr. Anya Sharma, who led the Whitby project, describes the feeling of seeing that first radar scan as one of profound connection. It is not about finding treasure, she says, but about recovering context, understanding the precise physical circumstances in which these objects were hidden. This technology fundamentally changes our relationship with history. We are no longer just interpreting the past from its surviving fragments. We are actively reconstructing it in 3 dimensions, restoring the hidden architecture of knowledge itself. These powerful tools have already illuminated several stunning case studies where the floorboards finally gave up their ghosts. The ruins of St. Albans Abbey held their secret for 500 years. Historical records hinted at a hidden library, a whispered legend among local historians, but its exact location was a mystery lost to time. The breakthrough came when an archaeological team, cross-referencing a medieval account of the abbey's dissolution with their ground-penetrating radar scans, noticed a significant anomaly directly beneath the site of the old choir stalls. The radar pulses revealed a hollow space, a void that should not have been there, precisely where a desperate abbot might have ordered a last-minute concealment. The excavation that followed was a masterclass in patience. Brushes and dental picks replaced trowels as layers of soil and rubble were carefully removed, revealing not a single chest, but a collection of lead-lined boxes, their seals miraculously intact. The team's lead conservator described the moment the first box was opened in the laboratory, the air inside still and cool. There, protected from damp and decay, lay a stack of parchment that offered an unparalleled window into the mind of a medieval monastery. The variety of finds was breathtaking. Alongside the expected liturgical books were robust legal documents detailing land disputes, proving the abbey's role as a major administrative hub. There were literary works, including beautifully illustrated poetry, and personal letters that spoke of friendships and rivalries with other Benedictine houses across England and Normandy. This was not a random collection, but a curated library of what the community deemed most vital to save. Among the most significant discoveries were the historical chronicles of Matthew Paris, a monk of St. Albans himself. His vibrant, often opinionated writings provide a year-by-year account of 13th century England, filled with sketches of royal coronations, natural disasters, and even the first elephant scene in the country. Alongside these were rare musical notations, preserving melodies used in worship, and personal letters that debated intricate theological points with scholars at Canterbury and York. These marginalia are particularly revealing. In one manuscript, a monk penned a heated rebuttal to an argument made by a counterpart at Bury St. Edmund's Abbey, a fiery intellectual debate frozen in ink on the edge of a sacred page. The condition of the items told their own story of urgency. Some manuscripts were perfectly preserved, carefully wrapped in linen. Others were clearly stuffed into their containers in a rush, their corners bent, a testament to the panic of that final day before the king's commissioners arrived. The conservation efforts were a race against time, as experts worked to stabilize the fragile pages, using humidification chambers to gently relax crumpled parchment and digital scanners to capture every detail before the ink could further degrade. Together, these documents reveal the Abbey not as an isolated spiritual fortress, but as the beating heart of a vast operational network. The legal charters show its economic reach, the chronicles its political influence, and the personal letters its deep intellectual connections. It makes you wonder, if you had to quickly hide a box of your own most important records, what would future archaeologists learn about your daily life, your beliefs, your network of friends? The story of St. Albans is a powerful reminder that one site can hold an entire world, yet it is only a single chapter in a much larger book. Monte Cassino rises from its mountain peak like a fortress of the mind, a beacon of learning that refused to be extinguished. This Italian abbey, founded by Saint Benedict himself, was a nerve center of the medieval network, yet its history is a brutal cycle of destruction and rebirth. Ravaged by Lombard invaders in the 6th century, sacked by Saracens in the 9th, and nearly leveled by an earthquake in the 14th, its very existence was a testament to resilience. With each catastrophe, the monks returned to rebuild, but they also learned a grim lesson. Some knowledge was too precious, too dangerous to leave exposed. The repeated destructions created a culture of proactive secrecy, leading them to hide their most sensitive writings in the very floors they would walk upon. When modern restorers carefully opened these cavities, they found not just books but puzzles. The manuscripts were written in a complex web of codes, pointing to a clandestine channel of communication flowing between monasteries. Cryptanalyst Dr. Elena Morty describes these ciphers as sophisticated intellectual games. The most common were substitution ciphers, where each letter in the alphabet was systematically replaced by another symbol or letter. Others used elaborate shorthand systems known as Tianian notes, a form of a NCIENT Chinese letter that allowed scribes to record speech in real time, but could also obscure meaning from the uninitiated. Breaking these codes requires understanding the medieval mind, she explains. You look for patterns, for the repeated symbols that must represent common letters like E or T, and you slowly pry the message open. The types of messages they protected were as varied as the network itself. Some were undoubtedly administrative, using code to discuss sensitive financial transactions or political alliances that needed to be hidden from rival lords or even from the Pope's own inspectors. Others guarded theological secrets, perhaps unorthodox interpretations of Scripture that would have been deemed heretical if discovered in the wrong hands. Then there were the scientific and alchemical notations. One particular manuscript from Monte Cassino, still only partially deciphered, is believed to contain encoded alchemical recipes. Its pages are filled with strange symbols representing metals, planets, and chemical processes, a coded cookbook for transformation meant only for a trusted few. Creating these cryptographic texts demanded a unique set of skills, blending the scribe's art with the codemaker's cunning. The scribe had to be fluent in multiple languages, possess a meticulous hand to avoid ambiguous symbols, and hold the intellectual capacity to both encode and decode complex ideas. The materials themselves added another layer of security. They used the most durable iron gall ink on the finest vellum, ensuring the coded message would survive not just the elements, but repeated handling by those in the know. The very act of writing in code was a declaration that some truths were not for public consumption, but were the exclusive property of a learned in-group. This practice forces a direct parallel to our own world. How do we use codes today to protect information? We encrypt our emails, we secure our financial transactions with layers of digital cryptography, and we protect state secrets with ciphers far more complex than anything at Monte Cassino. The impulse is identical: to control the flow of sensitive knowledge and to create a trusted circle of understanding. The discovery at Monte Cassino does more than highlight medieval sophistication. It reveals a timeless human need to hide our most valuable thoughts, whether they are written on parchment or stored as bits in a server farm. Renovations at Canterbury Cathedral uncovered a different kind of treasure entirely. While workers carefully lifted floorboards near the old infirmary, their tools did not scrape against lead-lined boxes of parchment. Instead, they revealed a carefully wrapped bundle of metal and wood, a practical toolkit for understanding the world. Here were not just texts about science, but the scientific instruments themselves, preserved in their hiding place for centuries. This was the applied mind of the monastery, a hidden laboratory where faith and empirical observation worked hand in hand. The collection was a revelation. A beautifully crafted astrolabe, its brass plates etched with a map of the heavens, could calculate the time by day or night and track the positions of stars. There were surgical tools, scalpels, and probes of a design that would have been used for minor procedures in the infirmary. Most telling of all was a precise set of small brass scales, its weights meticulously calibrated. This was no abstract philosophy. It was the tangible evidence of a knowledge network focused on solving real-world problems. Historians of science like Dr. Ben Carter point to these instruments as proof of a vibrant experimental culture. The astrolabe was not merely an ornament, it was a crucial teaching aid. A master could use it to demonstrate astronomical principles to novices, turning the abstract movements of the cosmos into a physical model they could hold in their hands. In the infirmary, the scales were used to weigh ingredients for medicines according to recipes found in monastic herbals, blending local plant lore with knowledge translated from Arabic medical texts. The origins of these designs trace a map of intellectual exchange. The astrolabe's complex geometry reflected Greek and Islamic scholarship, likely arriving in England through copies held in other monastic libraries. The surgical tools showed the influence of Roman medical practice, preserved and refined over generations. The craftsmanship was local, however, the work of a skilled metalsmith who understood that precision in these tools could mean the difference between a successful treatment and a failed one. This practical application of knowledge had direct economic consequences. A monastery that could accurately tell time could organize its day and its agricultural labor more efficiently. One that could effectively treat illness could care for its own monks and the surrounding population, bolstering its reputation and stability. The scales used to compound remedies were the same tools that ensured fair trade in the marketplace, linking the pursuit of health directly to the economic health of the community. Think about the tools you use every day to learn and solve problems. Your smartphone with its GPS and search engine, your kitchen scale for following a recipe, the smartwatch that tracks your health. These are our modern astrolabes and medicinal scales, the applied instruments of our own knowledge network. They show that the drive to turn abstract information into practical action is a timeless human endeavor, one that was quietly flourishing beneath the very floors of Canterbury Cathedral, waiting for its moment to be seen again. That same beautifully illuminated manuscript began not with a quill, but with a ledger. The creation of knowledge was a costly enterprise, a delicate balance of spiritual devotion and hard economic reality. Every sheet of parchment, every pot of ink, and every hour a monk spent in the scriptorium represented a significant investment from the wider community. An abbey was not just a house of prayer, it was a major economic player managing vast estates, collecting rents, and directing a complex flow of resources that ultimately determined what could be written, copied, and hidden away. The primary engine funding this intellectual work was land. A wealthy monastery like Cluny in France controlled thousands of acres, worked by peasant tenants whose labor and dues provided the steady income needed to support a large population of non-farming scribes and scholars. This feudal model was supplemented by a constant stream of patronage. A noble family seeking spiritual merit or political favor might donate a parcel of land or a chest of silver specifically to endow the scriptorium, ensuring prayers would be said for their souls in perpetuity. Historian Dr. Elena Vance explains that this patronage system directly shaped the content of the knowledge produced. A duke interested in law might fund the copying of legal texts, while a queen devoted to a particular saint would commission a lavish life of that saint. The abbey's intellectual output was in many ways a mirror of its donors' interests. Inside the scriptorium, the budgeting was meticulous. The armarius, the librarian and master scribe, was as much an accountant as a scholar. He had to calculate the staggering cost of materials. A single large Bible could require the skins of 200 sheep, a massive capital outlay. The most vibrant pigments were luxury imports, ground lapis lazuli from Afghanistan for brilliant blue, or vermilion from distant mines for a rich red. The abbey's own economy had to be robust enough to afford this palette. This led to a surprising trade in knowledge products. A scriptorium with a particular reputation for beautiful illuminations might operate like a specialized workshop, producing commissioned prayer books for wealthy lay patrons or other monasteries. In one documented case, an abbey in Flanders traded a set of exquisitely illuminated choir books to a local baron in exchange for his military protection, a direct barter of art for security. This system created stark inequalities across the network. A richly endowed royal abbey could afford a large scriptorium, a vast library, and the latest texts from across Europe. A small, poor priory might struggle to produce even its own liturgical books, its monks copying texts onto scraps of recycled parchment, their intellectual world necessarily smaller and more isolated. Economic crises like famine or war could halt knowledge production for a generation, as resources were diverted to simple survival. During the Great Famine of the early 14th century, many scriptoria fell silent, their scribes succumbing to hunger or being sent to work the fields. It makes you consider the parallel to our own time, which ideas get funded and amplified today because a wealthy backer or a powerful algorithm deems them valuable. The very linguistic diversity found in those hidden caches, from formal Latin to the everyday dialects scribbled in the margins, was a direct reflection of this economic landscape, funded by the land, shaped by patronage, and preserved at great cost against an uncertain world. A single hidden chest could hold a cacophony of tongues, from the formal cadence of Latin to the earthy rhythms of Old English. These polyglot manuscripts are the ultimate testament to a network that was stunningly cosmopolitan, a world connected not by a single language, but by the learned skill of translation. Picture a monk in a Northumbrian scriptorium, his brow furrowed in concentration as he works through a complex Greek medical text, carefully rendering its wisdom into the accessible Latin that will carry it to physicians across Europe. This was not an isolated act, it was the fundamental process that kept the entire knowledge network alive and growing. The languages found in these caches form a linguistic map of the medieval mind. Latin served as the unwavering backbone, the international language of the church, law, and high scholarship. Yet nestled right beside these weighty tomes were works in Greek, preserving the philosophical and scientific foundations of the classical world. Texts in Arabic appeared, bearing advanced mathematics and astronomy from the Islamic world. And then there were the vibrant vernaculars, Old English, Old Irish, Early German, and others, used for everything from property records and poetry to personal notes scribbled in the margins. Philologists who study these manuscripts observe a fascinating phenomenon, code switching, where a scribe might begin a sentence in formal Latin and seamlessly slip into his native tongue to explain a difficult concept or add a local flavor. This was not a sign of poor education, but of a flexible, practical mind, using every tool at his disposal to ensure understanding. The reasons for this incredible diversity were as practical as they were profound. Missionary work demanded linguistic adaptation, as monks traveling to convert new peoples needed to learn their languages and often produced the first written grammars and dictionaries. Trade contacts along routes stretching from the Baltic to the Mediterranean brought merchants and their languages to monastery gates, along with exotic texts. But perhaps the most powerful driver was simple, unquenchable scholarly curiosity, a hunger for knowledge that transcended any single culture. This created a clear hierarchy of languages for specific purposes. Latin was the indispensable lingua franca, the common ground that allowed an English scholar and an Italian theologian to debate. Greek was the language of specialized, ancient wisdom, while Arabic texts were prized reservoirs of cutting-edge science. The vernacular languages, however, were the lifeblood of local identity and practical administration. The hidden library at Bobbio Abbey in Italy provides a perfect illustration. Its floorboard caches yielded texts not only in Latin but in Irish, left there by traveling monks from the Hiberno Scottish mission, their distinct script a permanent mark on the continent. This linguistic stew presented immense challenges for the scribes. Copying a multilingual text required a deep familiarity with different alphabets and grammatical rules. A single mistake in transliterating a Greek or Arabic word could alter the entire meaning of a medical recipe or a philosophical argument. The very act of translation was a creative, interpretive process where a monk had to find equivalent concepts between vastly different worlds of thought. So how does language shape our access to knowledge today? When a scientific paper is published only in English, or when a social media algorithm filters content based on your language settings, new gateways and new barriers are formed, just as they were 1,000 years ago. This rich tapestry of tongues preserved together in the dark proves that the medieval mind was not provincial but profoundly interconnected, a reality we can only grasp by mapping the physical pathways these ideas traveled. That digital map of Europe begins to shimmer with light, each point a monastery, each connecting line a thread in the continent's collective mind. We can now chart the very arteries of medieval thought using geographic information systems, a technology that layers historical data onto maps to reveal the hidden anatomy of this intellectual exchange. The method is a form of digital detective work, piecing together clues from manuscript provenance, the analysis of a book's script and materials to trace it back to its home abbey. When a manuscript copied in Ireland is found in a library in Italy, a line is drawn. When travel records show an abbot journeying from Canterbury to Rome, carrying letters and books, another connection flashes to life. The resulting visualization is breathtaking, a web of light that grows denser over the centuries, illuminating the superhighways of medieval knowledge. Network theorists studying these patterns see clear structures of centralization and diffusion. Certain abbeys emerge as undeniable superhubs. Cluny in France, with its 1,000 dependent priories, acts as a brilliant, centralized star. Canterbury in England and Monte Cassino in Italy shine just as brightly, powerful attractors for scholars and texts. But the map also reveals the vital importance of peripheral nodes, smaller abbeys in places like Scotland or Hungary that fed new ideas and local perspectives into the main network. The physical landscape dictated the flow of information. Knowledge traveled along Roman roads, snaked up river valleys like the Rhine and the Danube, and hopped from island monastery to island monastery across the Irish Sea. Political boundaries could act as both barriers and conduits, with the empire of Charlemagne providing a unified space for ideas to flow freely, while warring kingdoms could create temporary blackouts. A perfect example of this mapped exchange is the rapid spread of Cistercian architectural style. The order's distinctive, austere beauty did not spread by chance. As new Cistercian abbeys were founded from Sweden to Portugal, the map shows a direct transfer of design principles. A founding party of monks would travel from a mother house like Clairvaux in France, carrying not just their rule but precise architectural plans. They would establish a new community, and the local stone would be cut to match a template conceived hundreds of miles away. This created a visible family tree of buildings, each new abbey a node that reinforced the network's identity and cohesion. It makes you wonder, when we track the viral spread of a meme or a software update across the internet today, are we not creating our own real-time maps of cultural diffusion, watching digital rivers follow the contours of our own social and technological landscape? This grand geographic perspective, focused on the movement of texts and styles, naturally leads us to ask a more human question. Who else was moving within these networks, whose contributions have been less visible on the map, yet were just as essential to its function? The vibrant intellectual map of medieval Europe was not drawn by men alone. While the great abbeys often dominate the historical record, a parallel network of women was thriving within convent walls, contributing profoundly to the era's knowledge economy. These women, from abbesses to scribes, were not passive recipients of learning but active, vital creators and curators. In the 10th century, a canoness named Hertzwitha of Gandersheim sat in her Saxon scriptorium, composing not just prayers but sophisticated Latin plays and epic histories. She explicitly wrote to provide morally sound alternatives to the Roman playwright Terence. Her work a testament to a formidable intellect operating with confidence and purpose. Feminist historians like Dr. Cordula Whittaker emphasize that these women exercised significant agency, often navigating a patriarchal system with remarkable skill. They were not merely exceptions but integral nodes in the web of learning. An abbess was a powerful administrator, often ruling over double monasteries that housed both monks and nuns, managing vast estates and founding schools that educated the local nobility. Lay noblewomen acted as crucial patrons, donating precious books and land to convents, thereby directly funding the production of knowledge. The types of knowledge these women prioritized often reflected their specific responsibilities and social roles. Medical care was a primary focus. Convents frequently operated infirmaries for their own communities and the surrounding populace, and the manuscripts they produced are filled with detailed herbals, remedies, and practical guides to healing. This was applied science in the service of charity. The constraints they faced were very real. Their physical mobility was often restricted, limiting their ability to travel for study or to attend great councils. Yet they developed ingenious strategies to overcome these barriers. They maintained extensive correspondence networks, exchanging letters, books, and ideas with male and female scholars across the continent. The famous tragic correspondence between Helois and Abelard, while a story of a personal relationship, is also a stark record of a profound intellectual partnership, where Helois's theological and philosophical insights are given powerful voice. Within their scriptoria, female scribes produced manuscripts of stunning quality. The survival of their distinct handwriting styles and artistic signatures in colophons proves their direct involvement in the craft. They educated the daughters of the elite, passing on literacy, music, and complex administrative skills, thereby shaping the minds of the next generation of powerful women. When you look at the knowledge systems of today, who are the voices that might be similarly overlooked in our digital networks, whose contributions are essential yet less celebrated? The stories of these medieval women add a crucial layer of depth to our understanding, revealing a network far more diverse and resilient than previously imagined, a richness that finds fascinating parallels and contrasts in the learned traditions of the East. A world away from the damp stone of Cluny, the sun-baked cliffs of Cappadocia hid a different kind of library. While Western monks were sealing lead chests beneath choir stalls, their Eastern Orthodox counterparts in Byzantium were carving entire monasteries into soft volcanic rock, safeguarding their wisdom in labyrinthine caves. This was not an isolated system, but a parallel universe of knowledge, thriving along the Silk Road and facing its own unique storms. The Scriptoria of Mount Athos, a mountainous peninsula in Greece that became the spiritual heart of orthodoxy, hummed with a multilingual energy. Scribes there produced elegant Greek texts of Aristotle and Plato, but they were also busy creating the first translations into Old Church Slavonic, a linguistic bridge built by Saints Cyril and Methodius to carry faith and learning to the Slavic peoples. Here, the very purpose of knowledge was shaped by a profound spiritual practice known as hesychasm, a form of contemplative prayer focused on inner silence and divine light. Where the West championed scholasticism, using logic and disputation to understand God, the Eastern tradition often emphasized mystical experience and the transformation of the self, a difference that would echo through their respective intellectual outputs. The materials they used tell a story of different trade routes. While Western abbeys relied heavily on costly parchment, Eastern monasteries, with their closer ties to the Islamic world and China, adopted paper much earlier. This more accessible medium helped fuel a different kind of literary explosion, one less bound by the staggering cost of animal skins. But this Eastern network faced its own existential threat, the violent crisis of iconoclasm. For over a century, emperors in Constantinople waged war on religious icons, ordering the systematic destruction of images seen as idolatrous. In response, monks throughout Cappadocia and beyond became preservationists on a massive scale. They hid countless icons and illustrated manuscripts in sealed chambers within their rock-cut churches, saving an entire artistic and theological tradition from eradication. The transmission routes for this knowledge were the ancient highways of Eurasia. The Silk Road was not just for silk, it was a data pipeline. Along these routes, Greek philosophical texts traveled east to Baghdad, where they were translated into Arabic and enriched by Islamic scholars, before sometimes finding their way back west in a new form. Meanwhile, mathematical concepts like the Hindu-Arabic numeral system began their slow journey into European consciousness through these very channels. This comparative view forces a crucial question. How do the deep intellectual and spiritual divides between East and West, forged in these very monasteries, still shape the kinds of knowledge we value and the ways we seek truth today? The legacy of these networks, one hidden under floorboards and the other concealed in cliff faces, reveals a universal human drive to protect what we hold most sacred, setting the stage for their final, enduring impact on our modern world. That long-forgotten manuscript, hidden for centuries beneath a stone slab, finally fell into the hands of a scholar like Petrarch. The ink was still black, the ideas still vibrant, and they ignited a revolution. The so-called Dark Ages were not a void, but a bridge, a necessary span that carried the light of classical learning forward to the Renaissance. Historians now describe this not as a sudden rebirth, but as a great harvesting of seeds carefully cultivated and protected within the monastic network for generations. The humanist cry to return to the original sources was only possible because those original sources had survived, patiently waiting in abbey libraries from Bobbio to Cluny. Consider the incredible journey of Aristotle's works. His complex philosophies on logic and nature were largely lost to Western Europe, but they had been preserved and expanded upon by scholars in the Islamic world. Through the translating schools in places like Toledo, Spain, these Arabic versions of Aristotle's texts, often with extensive commentaries, began filtering back into Latin Christendom. They entered through the very same monastic and cathedral channels that had always moved knowledge, sparking an intellectual earthquake at the new universities of Paris and Oxford. Suddenly, scholars like Thomas Aquinas could engage with a complete Aristotle, fusing his rationalist philosophy with Christian theology in a synthesis that would define Western thought for centuries. This transmission was not limited to philosophy. The medical school at Salerno, the first of its kind in Europe, drew directly on this recovered stream of knowledge. Its practitioners blended the monastic herbal traditions of Western Europe with newly translated medical texts from the Greek and Arab worlds, creating a sophisticated, practical science of healing. A single manuscript on anatomy or pharmacology, once hidden in a Benedictine abbey, could now become a printed textbook, standardizing medical education across the continent. The recovery of classical texts had a direct and tangible impact on the technology that would define the modern era, the printing press. Why do you think the first books Gutenberg chose to print were Bibles? Because the market and the format were already well established by centuries of monastic production. The codex form, the layout of the page, the very idea of a standardized text all these were refinements of a model perfected in the scriptorium. The press did not invent the book. It industrialized a process that monks had already perfected, allowing the knowledge they had guarded to flood into the world at an unprecedented speed. The center of gravity for learning shifted decisively from the secluded cloister to the bustling urban university, but the fuel for this new engine was old, very old. The humanists scouring Italy for classical manuscripts were often pulling them directly from monastic libraries. The famous discovery of a complete copy of Cicero's speeches in a library at Bobbio Abbey, for instance, provided a new model for Latin style and rhetoric that became a cornerstone of Renaissance education. These finds were not accidents. They were the direct result of a preservation project that had lasted for 1,000 years. So when you look at a modern open-access digital library, a repository of human knowledge available to anyone with an internet connection, you are seeing the ultimate expression of that medieval impulse. The monks saved the data, the humanists curated it, the printers distributed it, and we now digitize it. The cycle of preservation, recovery, and dissemination continues. What fragile knowledge are we safeguarding today, perhaps in a forgotten server or an obsolete format, that will form the bedrock of a future renaissance we can scarcely envision? The quiet hum of a modern data center is the distant echo of a medieval scriptorium. Our sprawling digital commons, from open-source software repositories to massive online archives, faces the same fundamental challenges as the Abbey network: preservation, access, and trust. The medieval solution was a decentralized web of human curators, a model offering powerful lessons for our own fragile information age. Information scientist Dr. Liam Chen observes that the true breakthrough of the monastic system was not storage, but its resilient architecture. When Viking raiders destroyed the library at Lindisfarne, the knowledge itself survived because copies existed in dozens of other abbeys across Europe. This principle of radical redundancy is the bedrock of modern digital preservation. Today's most robust cloud storage systems do not keep your files in one magical box. They distribute fragments of your data across multiple servers, often in different geographic locations. If one data center fails, the network rebuilds the information from the remaining pieces, a direct digital parallel to the monastic practice of copying and dispersing manuscripts. This leads to the second principle: community-driven curation. A medieval library was not a random collection. The armarius, the librarian, decided which texts to copy, which to acquire, and which to prioritize based on the needs and mission of his community. This is the human element behind the algorithms that now curate our digital worlds. The glosses and marginalia scribbled by monks are the medieval equivalent of metadata, the tags, comments, and version histories that give context to a raw file. They tell us not just what a text says, but how people used it, questioned it, and connected it to other ideas. This curated, contextualized knowledge builds trust, a currency in dangerously short supply online. The third lesson is the necessity of long-term thinking. A monk illuminating a manuscript knew he was working for a future he would never see, investing in a timescale of centuries. Our digital systems, in contrast, often operate on cycles of planned obsolescence. File formats become unreadable, storage media degrades, and platforms vanish. The medieval mind would have built for migration and forward compatibility, treating knowledge as a perpetual trust. The risks of ignoring these principles are starkly visible in the dangers of centralization. Just as the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII nearly erased entire libraries by targeting a single point of failure, our over-reliance on a few corporate platforms creates systemic vulnerability. A single policy change, a security breach, or a company's collapse could evaporate vast swaths of our collective digital memory. The solution, as the abbeys knew, lies in a peer-to-peer ethos. Their messenger system, where travelers carried letters and books along established routes, is the blueprint for decentralized networks that share data directly between users without a central controlling authority. So the next time you save an important file, ask yourself a simple question. Is it stored in just one place, vulnerable to a single point of failure, or have you distributed its copies, creating your own personal, resilient network? These ancient strategies for safeguarding thought are more relevant than ever, forcing us to confront the ethical weight of the systems we are building for the future. A single misplaced tile could desecrate a space that has been a site of prayer for 1,000 years. This is the profound ethical dilemma facing archaeologists and historians who seek to uncover the very treasures we have been discussing. The drive for knowledge must be carefully weighed against the imperative of respect for living traditions and sacred ground. Picture a team of researchers granted limited access to a cathedral that remains an active parish. They have ground-penetrating radar data indicating a potential cavity beneath the floor near the high altar. Do they proceed with an excavation that would disrupt daily worship and potentially damage the spiritual heart of the building? Or do they leave the secret undisturbed, preserving both the site's sanctity and its mystery? This tension between discovery and reverence defines modern archaeological ethics. Ethicists like Dr. Samuel Petrovic frame this not as a right to uncover, but a responsibility of stewardship. We are temporary guardians of this past, he argues, not its owners. This stewardship is guided by several core principles. The first is minimal intervention. Today's archaeologists use non-invasive technologies like radar and three-dimensional scanning to gather as much data as possible before ever considering physical disturbance. The goal is to learn without harming, to see without breaking seals that have held for centuries. The second principle is exhaustive provenance research, tracing the chain of ownership of an object from its creation to its present location. This is crucial for addressing historical wrongs. Many artifacts currently in major museums were taken from dissolved abbeys during the Reformation or acquired through later colonial expeditions, their removal often involving coercion or outright theft. A poignant case involves a set of precious chalices and reliquaries from a Welsh abbey, now housed in a national museum hundreds of miles away. Local community groups have petitioned for their return, arguing that these objects are vital to their cultural and spiritual identity, representing a history that was forcibly taken from them. This leads directly to the third and most challenging principle, repatriation. When is it right to return an object to its place of origin? The debate is complex, involving questions of preservation capacity, the object's role as part of a global heritage, and the undeniable moral claim of those to whom it is most sacred. The conversation has expanded to actively include indigenous knowledge and oral histories, which often provide context that written records lack. An elder from a local community might hold stories about a hidden crypt that no surviving document ever mentions. Furthermore, the commercial value of these finds creates a constant risk of looting. Every publicized discovery can tempt treasure hunters with metal detectors, who destroy archaeological context forever in their search for a saleable object. This places a heavy responsibility on museums to rigorously verify the legal and ethical provenance of any new acquisition, refusing to traffic in illicit antiquities. So how do we ethically handle these hidden histories when we find them? The answer seems to lie in a slow, collaborative process that prioritizes conversation over conquest and views the act of uncovering not as a takeover, but as an invitation. It is a process that prepares us not just to understand the past, but to honor its continuing presence in our world, a crucial mindset as we consider what future discoveries may still lie in wait. Beneath the ruins of a Spanish Cistercian cloister, a single ground-penetrating radar scan hints at a void no larger than a breadbox. This is the frontier where the map of our understanding still holds vast blank spaces. Across Europe, from the remote Irish round towers battered by Atlantic storms to the forgotten urban monasteries buried beneath modern city streets, countless abbeys have never felt the careful touch of an archaeologist's trowel. The potential locked within their unexcavated floors is staggering. We could be on the verge of finding an unknown epic poem that redefines a national literature, or a set of early scientific instruments that show a more sophisticated grasp of astronomy than we ever credited to the medieval mind. Experts are now using artificial intelligence to cross-reference historical travel records, manuscript provenance, and preliminary geophysical surveys, creating a predictive map of the most promising sites. For instance, at the ancient site of Iona Abbey in Scotland, subtle anomalies in the soil suggest the outline of a previously unknown chamber, possibly a sealed scriptorium from its earliest days as a center of learning. The challenges, however, are immense. Funding for such meticulous work is always scarce, and the moment a site is opened, the race against decay begins, requiring immediate and expensive conservation. This is where a new wave of citizen science is making a difference. Enthusiasts can now help transcribe scanned documents from home or contribute to crowd-funded geophysical surveys, bringing us closer to the next great revelation. You could be part of the team that finally lifts the floorboard on a lost library, simply by lending your curiosity to the digital effort. This history is not a closed book, but an ongoing excavation, and its next chapter might well be written with your help. That legacy of hidden knowledge is not a closed door, but an open invitation waiting for your curiosity. You can walk directly into this story without any formal training, simply by lending your eyes and your time to a global digital effort. Online platforms now host vast archives of manuscript scans, and they need volunteers to help transcribe them. Imagine sitting at your kitchen table, your screen filled with the very handwriting of a 12th century scribe, and as you carefully type each word, you are the first person in 800 years to read his thoughts. This is not a passive hobby, it is active preservation. Community historian Dr. Anya Sharma, who works with such projects, notes that public participation is the modern equivalent of the monastic messenger system. Every transcribed page is another letter carried forward, ensuring the network remains alive. One of the most powerful resources is the digital scriptorium, a collaborative online database that aggregates manuscript images from libraries across the world. It allows you to virtually leaf through a prayer book from Paris or study a medical text from Bologna, all from your own home. For those who prefer to explore with their feet, countless abbey sites welcome visitors. Walking through the soaring ruins of Revaux or the intact cloisters of Maulbronn lets you feel the scale and the silence, making the history you have learned tangible and immediate. To deepen your understanding, books like Elena Vance's The Silent Web or documentaries such as The Medieval Mind offer compelling entry points into this world. If you are drawn to more direct action, consider supporting organizations like the National Trust or local preservation societies, which rely on public donations and volunteers to protect these fragile sites. Some even offer the rare chance to participate in an archaeological dig, where you might spend a week carefully sifting soil, your own hands touching the same stones that once supported a scribe's desk. This engagement brings the entire story full circle. By transcribing a single line of text, visiting one local ruin, or simply sharing this history with a friend, you become a new node in an ancient network. You are no longer just a spectator of history, but an active participant in its preservation. What first step will you take to add your own thread to this enduring web of knowledge? The journey from those quiet floorboards to our noisy digital world reveals a timeless truth that knowledge survives not by chance but by conscious collective effort. We have seen the medieval abbey as a living hub, an intellectual engine where architecture and daily ritual were designed to generate and protect ideas. We uncovered the desperate reasons for concealment, from Viking raids to royal dissolution, that forced communities to bury their most precious treasures. We met the individuals, the scribes and abbesses, whose painstaking labor and personal courage formed the human links in this vast chain. And we have traced the lasting impacts of this network, how the seeds it preserved blossomed into the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and the very foundations of our modern world. This entire story is a masterclass in resilience and innovation. It shows us that the most robust systems are not the most centralized, but the most deeply interconnected and redundantly designed, a lesson we must heed as we build our own digital commons. A medieval chronicler once wrote that knowledge is a light that never dies. It may be hidden under a stone, scattered by conflict, or encoded in a forgotten cipher, but its glow persists, waiting for a future generation to lift it up again. That task of preservation now falls to us. You can carry this light forward by reading a book on monastic history, by visiting the breathtaking ruins of a local abbey and feeling its stones, or by simply sharing these forgotten stories with a friend. Thank you for exploring these hidden chapters of our past. If this journey through the medieval mind has sparked your curiosity, subscribe for more deep dives into history. And I would love to hear from you which abbey mystery, from the coded manuscripts of Monte Cassino to the practical toolkit of Canterbury, fascinates you